I learned where I truly stood in my family on a night that was supposed to be joyful. The dining room was full, voices overlapping, plates pushed aside as relatives leaned in close. My father stood at the head of the table, glass raised, waiting for silence. When it came, he smiled proudly and congratulated my brother on graduating. He talked about hard work, perseverance, and deserving rewards. Then he reached under the table and pulled out a set of keys. The reaction was instant. Applause burst from every corner of the room. My brother stared at the keys like they might disappear. Someone laughed. Someone hugged him. The moment felt loud, warm, and complete. I clapped too, because that's what I always did. After the noise settled, my father's eyes shifted to me. He didn't raise his voice this time. He didn't smile. He handed me a folded piece of paper and spoke quietly, like we were discussing something practical. "Rent," he said. $900. Due by Sunday. For a second, I genuinely thought it was a joke. The timing was too strange to feel real. I looked past him toward the garage, where people were already drifting to see the new car. My brother's laughter floated back into the house. Something inside me went completely still. My name is Mara Ellison, and on paper, I looked like the child parents were supposed to brag about. I worked in community outreach, a job that required patience, emotional control, and the ability to stay calm when everything around you was breaking. I didn't learn those skills at work. I learned them at home. From the outside, our family looked solid. Neatly kept house. Framed photos lining the hallway. Dinners that happened on schedule. My mother believed peace was something you preserved by avoiding conflict. My father believed respect came from discipline and control. And my brother existed in a softer space, where mistakes were explained away and effort was always praised. Growing up, we lived under the same roof but followed different rules. When my brother struggled, the family leaned toward him. When I succeeded, it was treated as expected. Scholarships weren't celebrated. Promotions were normal. Independence was convenient. After college, I moved back home with a plan. Save money. Gain experience. Move out. I paid for groceries, covered bills when something broke, handled tasks no one else wanted to deal with. I didn't keep score. I told myself it was temporary. My mother liked to say my father trusted me more, as if trust explained why responsibility only flowed one way. That night, the truth finally settled in. The rent wasn't about money. I could afford it. It was about contrast. About reminding me where I belonged while everyone else celebrated. It wasn't said in anger. It was said with certainty. The rest of the evening moved around me like I wasn't really there. People admired the car. Another bottle was opened. My brother kept saying he couldn't believe it. I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes that were already clean, smiling when spoken to, waiting for the feeling in my chest to pass, but he didn't. Later, alone in my room, the number replayed in my head. 900. By Sunday. Not a request. A decision already made without me. I opened my laptop and looked at my savings. Enough to leave. Enough to stop negotiating my worth. And that was when I realized staying had always been a choice. The letter that arrived days later proved the rent was only the beginning and my name had already been used without my consent. I didn't leave immediately after that night. Not because I doubted myself, but because I needed to understand the full shape of what I was walking away from. I paid the rent without comment. $900 transferred quietly, like an admission I never spoke out loud. My parents didn't thank me. They simply accepted it as confirmation that I would continue to play my role. The house felt different after that. Smaller. Heavier. Conversations happened around me, not with me. My brother talked excitedly about insurance, upgrades, weekend drives. My mother listened with pride. My father nodded, satisfied. No one mentioned the rent again. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. It wasn't addressed to the house. It was addressed to me. My name was printed cleanly across the front, followed by language that immediately tightened my chest. Final notice. I stood in the hallway reading it, the words blurring together before snapping into focus. I owed money. Not rent. Not utilities. A loan. A personal loan opened months earlier under my name. The balance was high enough to matter. High enough to follow me for years if ignored. The address listed wasn't mine. It was my parents' home. First, I assumed there had been a mistake. Identity errors happen. Systems glitch. I called the number listed, waiting on hold while the house hummed around me. When the representative came on the line, her tone was polite and firm. She confirmed the details. The account. The signature. The payment history. It was real. I asked when the loan had been opened. She gave me the date. My stomach dropped. It had been weeks before my brother's graduation. Weeks before the keys. Weeks before the rent. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I confronted my parents at the kitchen table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I placed the letter between us and asked a single question. Why? My mother picked it up slowly, scanning the page like she hadn't seen it before. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Silence stretched longer than it needed to. It was temporary, my mother said finally. We meant to tell you. My father added, it was easier this way. Easier. They explained it carefully, as if explaining to a child. My brother had made some mistakes. Bad investments. A few debts that needed to be handled quickly. They didn't want him to panic. They didn't want extended family to find out. Using my name was efficient. My credit was clean. My record was reliable. You're responsible, my mother said gently. We knew you'd understand. Something cold settled behind my ribs. You used my identity, I said. Without asking. My father frowned. We're family. They promised it would be paid back soon. They promised nothing would happen to me. They promised I was overreacting. The word hung in the air, familiar and heavy. I went to my room and locked the door. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled my credit report. I checked every account. The loan was there, bright and undeniable. I imagined future landlords, future employers, future plans all tangled in something I never agreed to be. Why morning, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about helping my brother, it was about sacrificing me. And the longer I stayed silent, the more they would take. When I refused to cover the loan, my parents made a move that crossed from betrayal into something far worse. I didn't confront them again right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to see how far they were willing to go without resistance. I stopped paying anything connected to the loan. No transfers. No reminders. Just silence. I wanted to know if their promises had weight, or if they only existed to keep me compliant. The answer came quickly. Within a week, the calls started. First from my mother, soft and worried, asking if everything was okay. Then from my father, sharper, irritated by what he called my delay. He reminded me that late payments could cause problems. He said it like a warning meant for my benefit, not a consequence of their actions. I told them I wouldn't be paying. The reaction was immediate. My mother cried. My father accused me of being dramatic. They said I was putting the family at risk. They said my brother was under enough pressure already. They said I was being selfish. That word landed hard. Selfish. I had built my adult life around not being that. I had been careful, reliable, invisible when necessary. Now, the moment I protected myself, it was treated as betrayal. 2 days later, my brother showed up at my door. He didn't knock. He walked in like nothing had changed, like this was still his space to enter freely. He talked fast, pacing the room, explaining how hard things had been. How he never meant for this to happen. How our parents were just trying to help him. I'll pay it back, he said. I just need time. I asked him a question I'd never asked before. Did you know they used my name? He hesitated. Long enough, he didn't answer directly. He said they told him it was handled. He said they said I wouldn't mind. He said I was always good with things like this. Something inside me snapped quietly. I told him he needed to leave. He laughed at first, thinking I wasn't serious. When I didn't move, his tone changed. He said I was overreacting. That families did things like this for each other. That I had more stability than he did, so it made sense. That was when I realized they all believed the same thing. Why stability wasn't something I earned, it was something they felt entitled to use. That night, I received an email from the lender. A reminder. Polite. Firm. My chest tightened as I read it. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was documentation. Paper trails. Consequences that didn't care about intentions. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I explained everything slowly, clearly, leaving nothing out. The rent. The loan. The forged signature. The promises. The pressure. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief pause. What they did is serious, she said. And you need to protect yourself now. She told me what steps to take. Credit freezes. Written notices. Formal documentation. She said I had options, but delay would only make things worse. That evening, I informed my parents in writing. Short. Direct. Professional. I would not pay the loan. I would be disputing it formally. Any further use of my information would involve legal action. The response wasn't remorse, it was anger. My father accused me of destroying the family. My mother begged me to reconsider. My brother sent a message calling me heartless. But beneath the noise, I felt something unfamiliar. Control. Because for the first time, my silence wasn't permission, it was a boundary. What my parents did next wasn't an apology, it was a calculated move that nearly cost me everything. I expected resistance. I expected anger. I even expected manipulation dressed up as concern. What I didn't expect was how quickly my parents would move from emotional pressure to calculated action once they realized I wasn't backing down. 3 days after I sent the formal notice, my bank account froze. I discovered it on a Tuesday morning while trying to pay for groceries. My card declined twice before the cashier looked at me with polite confusion. Embarrassed, I stepped aside and opened my banking app. A notification blinked at the top of the screen. Account under review. Please contact customer support. My hands shook as I called the number. The representative explained that an inquiry had been made regarding suspicious activity connected to my identity. A report suggested potential fraud tied to my accounts. Until the matter was reviewed, several functions would be temporarily restricted. I knew immediately where it had come from. I drove straight home, heart pounding, and found my parents waiting. My mother sat rigidly on the couch. My father stood by the window, arms crossed. They didn't look surprised to see me. We were trying to protect you, my mother said before I could speak. By reporting me? I asked why father finally turned. We told them there might be issues, he said. We didn't accuse you of anything. We just raised concerns. Concerns that conveniently froze my access to money. Concerns that painted me as unstable. Concerns that shifted attention away from their actions and onto my reaction. I felt cold. You're trying to scare me, I said. My mother shook her head. We're trying to slow this down. You're moving too fast. You don't understand the damage you're causing. The damage. Not the loan. Not the forged signature. Not the months of lies. My refusal. I left without another word. From my car, I called my lawyer. She was quiet for a long moment after I explained what had happened. Then her voice sharpened. This changes things, she said. They've escalated. Within hours, she contacted the bank, submitted documentation, and placed formal complaints. She told me to document everything. Screenshots. Dates. Messages. She said what they'd done could be interpreted as retaliation. That night, my parents sent messages. Long ones. Emotional ones. My mother wrote about family loyalty. My father wrote about consequences. My brother sent a single text. You're ruining everything. I didn't respond. The next day, my account access was restored. The bank apologized. The representative assured me the inquiry had been noted and closed. Another mark added to a growing file that now clearly showed a pattern. I felt exhausted, but also strangely clear. They weren't confused. They weren't scared. They were desperate to regain control. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. It meant that love, in their eyes, had always been conditional. As long as I absorbed pressure quietly, I was valued. The moment I resisted, I became a problem to manage. I spent that evening organizing paperwork. I printed emails. I labeled folders. I prepared timelines. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I worked. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped hoping they would change. I was focused on making sure they couldn't hurt me again. And that shift mattered more than they realized. The demand that came next wasn't about money, it was about forcing me back into my place. I thought they would back off after the bank incident. I thought the message was clear enough. I was wrong. When control doesn't work, people who depend on it often switch strategies. They stop threatening and start bargaining, hoping guilt will succeed where fear failed. The message arrived the following week. My mother asked to meet. Just her. Neutral place. Coffee shop near the park where she used to take us when we were younger. She said she wanted to talk calmly. No arguments, no accusations. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I trusted her, but because I wanted to hear what came next. She looked tired when she arrived. Older somehow. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She didn't waste time. She told me my brother's situation was worse than I understood. That creditors were circling. That the stress was affecting his health. That my father was barely sleeping. She spoke like a witness describing a tragedy already in motion. Then she made the offer. If I agreed to quietly take responsibility for the loan, they would make things right later. They would put everything back in order. They would make sure I wasn't affected long term. She said families did hard things for each other all the time. This was just another sacrifice. I stared at her, waiting for the part where she acknowledged what they had done to me. He never came. When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. She reminded me of everything they had given me growing up. A roof. Food. Education. She framed my childhood as a debt that was finally being collected. I realized then that this conversation wasn't about reconciliation. It was about payment. I told her no. The word landed softly between us, but its impact was immediate. Her face hardened. She accused me of being cold. Of choosing legal technicalities over blood. Of punishing my brother for mistakes he didn't fully understand. I stood up, left money on the table, and walked away. That night, the final attempt arrived, a formal-looking email from my father, CC to my brother. He demanded I either assume the loan or move out immediately. He listed deadlines, consequences, ultimatums. It was written like a contract, not a message from a parent. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Her response came quickly. "This is coercion," she said. "And it's poorly disguised." She drafted a reply that stripped away emotion entirely. It stated that any further attempts to pressure, threaten, or manipulate me would be documented and pursued legally. It reiterated the evidence. It outlined potential consequences for identity misuse and retaliation. The email went out the next morning. After that, everything went quiet. No calls. No messages. No demands. The silence wasn't peaceful at first. It felt tense, like the moment after a door slams when you're waiting to see if it will open again. But days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, the absence of chaos became something I could breathe inside. I moved my belongings out while no one was home. Just essentials. No confrontations. No speeches. I left the key on the counter and walked out without looking back. They never tried to stop me. And that told me everything. Walking away didn't end the story, but what happened afterward finally showed me who I was without them. Leaving didn't feel dramatic. There were no slammed doors or shouted accusations. I loaded my car in silence, drove away, and didn't stop until the house was far enough behind me that my chest finally loosened. I expected grief to hit all at once. Instead, what arrived first was quiet. Not empty quiet. Clean quiet. I moved into a small apartment across town, one with plain walls and windows that let in more light than I was used to. The first night there, I slept without waking to the sound of voices arguing in the other room. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rehearse explanations. I just rested. The loan dispute continued in the background, handled through formal channels instead of emotional ones. My lawyer kept me informed, but I no longer carried the weight of it alone. Documentation mattered more than guilt now. Facts mattered more than history. Slowly, the threat that had once felt overwhelming began to shrink into something manageable. I didn't hear from my parents for months. When updates did come, they arrived indirectly. An aunt mentioned my brother had moved back in with them. A cousin hinted that things were tense at home. No one apologized. No one took responsibility. They simply adjusted, the way people do when the person holding everything together finally steps away to work. Something shifted. Without constant family emergencies pulling at my attention, I focused more clearly. I spoke up without second-guessing myself. I took on responsibilities I would have previously avoided, afraid of rocking the boat. Within a year, I was promoted. Not because I had changed who I was, but because I finally had room to be that person fully. I noticed changes in myself outside of work too. I laughed more easily. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I made decisions without running them through imaginary conversations in my head. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It grew quietly, day by day. Sometimes, I thought about my family. Not with anger but with distance. I realized I didn't miss them as much as I missed the idea of them. The version I had hoped they could become if I just tried harder, gave more, stayed quieter. That version was never real. Walking away didn't destroy my family. It revealed it. It showed me exactly how much of their stability had been built on my compliance. When I stopped absorbing the pressure, everything else shifted into its proper place. People like to say family is everything. What they don't say is that family without boundaries can cost you your future. Loyalty without consent isn't loyalty. It's control. I didn't get closure in the form of apologies or changed behavior. What I got was something better. Freedom from roles I never agreed to play. Space to define myself without negotiation. There's one thing I learned through all of this. It's that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. And honesty, even when it's quiet and inconvenient, has a way of setting your life back on a path that actually belongs to you. I never went back. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally arriving somewhere real.